Thank you for that introduction. The last time we were together, I attempted to relate what I thought was very important information to people in a non-scientific manner. I've made presentations on the power of more comprehensive nutrition for about 30 years, and unfortunately, the language of science and medicine is heavily into Greek and Latin terms. And I'm afraid that because of this, it's not language in our day-to-day type communication, that a lot of information goes in one ear, out the other, with very little sticking in between. So our first session, I tried to relate it to something that everybody knows, because the King James Version of the Bible, 1611, is the most published and translated writing that has ever existed. And more people believe that what's in there. And I tried to relate the fact that the creative, designing, and organizing power in the universe, whether it's in the ancient Hebrew scriptures or the New Testament, states that individuals recognize that we're writing these information, that there is something going on that is very powerful in regard to the natural products in the plant kingdom and how they support life in the animal kingdom, which of course human beings are part of. And we're influenced a lot by people that have been conditioned, particularly in the public schools, to reject the information that is in the Bible. And for the secular crowd, I call this personal preventive and interventional health management. And the important thing, it reduces costs while elevating health and quality of life. The World Health Organization is a part of the United Nations, investigates all the member nations of the United Nations. And the last time this was done, the United States came in #1 in healthcare costs. It was about $10,300 per citizen per year, and rapidly increasing. On the last survey of all the member nations of the United Nations, the United States came in number 35th. So #1 in costs, number 35th in the benefits. And I related in our first presentation that what we have is safe beyond compare, and this has been proven in FDA new drug studies. And more comprehensive nutrition is effective because it's in harmony with the design and engineering of life, as is coded in DNA, or the genes that control cellular synthesis of bioactive molecules. And this is economical beyond any medical expert, health planners, or medical expert, or politicians' wildest dreams. Safe, effective, and economical. And it dates all the way back to 5,000 years in the past in the Old Testament, and then about 2,000 plus. And this is disruptive technology, because there are powerful forces that I call, as a group, the sickness industry, led by the Food and Drug Administration in behalf of the international pharmaceutical companies, but this expands to the American Medical Association, Hospital Association, the National Institutes of Health, the complex of medical schools, all of the sickness industry. It's important also, I try to point out in our first presentation, that nutrition, natural products found in plants that are nutrients, do not treat or cure a disease or abnormal condition, because it's against the law in the United States and most of the former British colonies to claim to treat or cure a disease or syndrome or abnormal condition with anything other than a government-approved pharmaceutical. And it's very important to say that nutrition only supports the normal biochemistry of life. Now, I want to go to our next slide, and it's not advancing. I don't know what to do when the slide won't advance. Very good. Now, finally advanced. What basis am I speaking to you? I'm not, and don't claim to be some highfalutin expert. And I have to say that during this pandemic experience for the population, a lot of scientific and medical experts have really debased that position. From 1954 to 58, I had a double major in chemistry and biology. And during that time, a very important thing, I was an extern for Dow Chemical Company at Beasley Research Center, where all the work was on polymer chemistry. The importance of this polymer chemistry is that each cell in our body acts much like a tiny ultra microscopic factory that takes nutrient molecules and hooks them together in cellular synthesis to make bioactive molecules that carry on the processes of life. Well, at the Beasley Research Center, we took gases and liquids and make different kind of plastics by hooking the molecules together and getting different properties from flexible plastic or transparent plastic to very rigid. In 58, 59, I worked on a PhD in cellular physiology, which means how do cells work, and that was incompleted. And then in 62, I got the MD degree in medicine at Southwestern Medical School of the University of Texas. And then I had 2 residency programs at Parkland Memorial Hospital in anatomic and clinical pathology. I was assigned in the U.S. Medical Corps to a 5-state pathology laboratory at Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas. And then I was chief of pathology for the Dallas-Fort Worth Medical Center for about 30 years. During that time on the side, I became a medical consultant to Carrington Laboratories. And out of this experience, this company, Carrington, was developed to find and do research on aloe leaf gel. And the goal was middle of the road science and medicine to develop a new pharmaceutical drug under the FDA. This middle of the road conventional science and medicine turned into a spiritual journey, which I particularly shared with you in our first session. In addition, from 94 to 204, I was medical director of Manatech Incorporated, which was an international dietary supplement company, and affiliated with it was Manna Relief Ministries that was active in giving products and more comprehensive nutrition to children in 81 third world countries, and that was certainly an interesting experience. So I have about 60 plus years of how do animals and human beings and plant cells work and the basis of life. But I didn't invent anything or come up with anything new. This is ancient knowledge and wisdom. I'm your messenger and your servant. Now, this is a list of institutions. I believe there are 12 here. The most distant was Southern Research Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, and also New York Medical Center in New York City, of experts, about 50 of them here, that it represents about 200 years beyond basic 4-year college instructions. We're talking about PhDs, MDs, doctors of veterinary medicine, and dentists that contributed to this. Now, I didn't learn everything that these different people learned in their extended education, but they shared with me what they knew about what I'll be sharing with you, and trying at this time to be more in harmony with what I've done for 30 years to try to simplify the science of how cells work and the importance and power of nutrition. Now, what we have to offer to people, again, is health. And that is, you can, if you don't have health, it doesn't matter how much money you have. And in our first session, we pointed out that in John 3, it says, I pray that you may prosper in good health, even as your soul prospers. And that's what we tried to emphasize on what you knew in the past and relate nutrition to this. But now we're going to try to go more toward the science of it. And it's very important that in 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of the United States was passed that created the dietary supplement industry and government regulations. And in the preamble, it states that medicine and science have shown nutrition is essential for good health, prevention of disease, and restoration of health. You might say, what more would you want? Well, what you would want is for this to be part of the law and not just in the preamble, because in the law, it states in the labeling section that only a government-approved pharmaceutical can claim or represent to treat, cure, or mitigate disease or improve an abnormal health condition. So what we do through nutrition is support the normal biochemistry and normal physiology of the human body. Now, the next thing we have to offer to people is an atom of wealth. If you've got a child or a member of your family is having to go regularly to the doctor, it can keep you broke. However, if you had to go to the hospital, it might take the rest of your career to pay the price of being in the hospital. And if you go into ICU for very long, you can't earn enough to pay the ICU bill. It's so high. The cost of healthcare has become exploitive. And to be able to reduce, as I say, this is a means for personal, preventive, and interventional health management that is safe, effective, and economical. And the third thing you can get out of this and sharing it with people is the joy, the fulfillment, the purpose in life of helping other people improve their health and wealth. There is a constant universal truth that the carpenter from Galilee said, love your neighbors yourself. And that's a rewarding thing to be able to bless others with their needs. Now, to explain the science of how our cells work and the importance of nutrition is a good example is just a few blocks from where I'm sitting talking to you is a General Motors assembly plant. Through rail cars and trucks, they bring in parts, and engineers have developed a plan of how to put these parts together in the assembly line inside a great big building, and out come completed products that look right and they function right if you have all the parts put together right. Well, that's how on the right-hand side, under the microscope at about 1,000 magnification, our trillions of cells in our body work. Each one is like an ultra microscopic little factory. And we chew parts that are nutrient molecules, starting with our teeth action, and it's mixed with saliva or water. And through the digestion process, these large molecules are broken down to small molecules that are absorbed across the membranes of the particularly small intestine and picked up in the serum and through the arterioles, the heart pumps nutrient molecules, or if you will, parts, to the various microscopic little factories called cells. And inside each cell is an assembly line I'll show to you in a minute, which is not our work, but others have done to prove this. And out of these cells, there are venules after going to the cells where hormones and bioactive molecules are circulated around to other cells, to the organs, to carry out the incredible process of life. We'll go into the details of this a little more now. And I'd like to point out that in regard to the parts that are molecular and atom size, that everyone's familiar with the artist's palette, and that the red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors, and you can mix them in such a manner like the yellow and blue will make that green spot. And you can make them either dark or light by the white that's there that can be added. But all the colors of the spectrum of Technicolor can be made by mixing the primary colors. And that this is the artist's palette, and I'm going to show you the greatest palette, shall we say, which is the composition of matter of all the atoms in the chart that we will come up with. Here it is. This is the palette, if you will, of the greatest creative organizing power of the universe that use these different molecules, much like the pigments, to make a work of art, which is the universe, animal life, and plant life is all made up of these. And the simplest here is the hydrogen atom at the left top, which has a nucleus and one electron, but that's a square of amount of energy that's combined in that hydrogen molecule. Contrasted with uranium down here, 238, which has 238 electrons, and it has a lot more power in that little package or that element. And if you doubt it, every time on TV when you've seen an atomic bomb go off, it's about the amount we're told it's in a washing machine or at most a refrigerator, that all of a sudden, with the use of dynamite, it is a fuse to convert it to release the energy that makes that atomic cloud. And before we're through, I will point out how the energy in 2 atoms of hydrogen combined with oxygen, which is a molecular weight of 18, it has 18 electrons, and 1920 would be a total of 20 electrons, the amount of energy that make up water, H2O, and can show you the power of just these simple molecules. So this is what the creative power of the universe used to make life. This is also Einstein developed the theory that energy is equal mass times the speed of light squared. So converting this mass to energy is a factor they talk about in quantum theory of matter. And I want to point out that the energy in water is absolutely incredible. You cannot have plant or animal life without water. Now, our Earth receives light from the sun, which comes in from the left. You see there, white light. And in a prism, it's broken into a spectrum of different frequencies of colors, from the, you don't see it, the infrared, and then the red, and then the blue, and right at the interspace of green and blue is a very thin band that of energy at a frequency that extracts chlorophyll in plant cells to start energy on Earth. There is a transmission of energy from our sun at this very narrow band that hits the chlorophyll and chloroplasts in single plant cells or all the way to grasses, trees, bushes. What's going on in a blade of grass or leaf is absolutely incredible in regard to taking energy from the sun and bringing it to earth, because we would have no energy life on earth if it were not for the fact that these plants can take carbon dioxide, which is a waste gas that we breathe out, and it comes from fermentation, CO2, carbon dioxide, carbon with two oxygen molecules, and hooks these carbon together with covalent bonds to make chains of carbon in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis goes on in this very narrow band that starts energy on Earth. Now, in making the building blocks from this carbon dioxide, that the carbon chain that photosynthesis makes is the core of chains of carbons for amino acids, for fatty acids, and for sugar molecules or carbohydrates. And these are from that table of composition of matter, the molecules that make up these basic chains. The carbon hooked together by a covalent bond, and in that bond, some of the energy from photosynthesis is stored in that bond between every carbon atom. And then we have hydrogen added to it, and nitrogen and oxygen. And this is much like the primary colors of red, blue, and yellow in the visible spectrum of what the prism does to white light coming to the sun. And these are very critical basic molecules in plant and animal life. Now, the carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis, and I'm pointing out here that in the green, you see a bond here and carbon, carbon, carbon. This is a cysteine amino acid, one of the units to make proteins. And I'm pointing out that the carbon chain, that there's a little bit of energy in this bond between each carbon. And cysteine is important because it has a sulfur and a hydrogen group attached to it. It makes it so important in the life process to bind to free radicals and toxic molecules, this SH group right here. But this is the amino acid. But in addition, this is the simplest fatty acid, butyric acid. There's 4 of these carbons together with a hydrogen added on each one of these carbons and an oxygen. And then you get into the chain of carbohydrates, and they start with 5, and the most common one is 6 carbons. And between each of these is this bond, the covalent bond that has energy from the sun that was gathered from in that photosynthesis process. This energy is released inside the cell, and I'll show you a picture when it's reversed in the mitochondria, that the energy in each of these bonds is transferred to adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the electronic stored molecule to run the metabolism of life. Now, here is a model of cell, and I just mentioned the mitochondria that reverses what goes on in photosynthesis to take the energy of that bond between the carbons. Primarily, glucose is the principal molecule from the carbohydrate family, and ATP is used to run these structures. Here is the nucleus of the cell, which has the chromosomes and the genes in it that have the instructions, much like the computer program to run your cell phone or your computer, like we are using right here in this presentation, to give instructions to these organelles out here, which start out, first step is endoplasmic reticulum, and then the three basic structures, the ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi, to carry out the assembly line in the cell. And it's kind of confusing here. And so we will go to a cartoon that eventually to try to tell you what's going on. Now, what we have here is one white cell in our peripheral blood that a special stain has been added in a compound to get the chromosomes to hook up. Where there's 46 of them, there will be 23 pairs. And they, under UV light, they fluoresce so you can see them. So you make a photograph of one cell, one white cell, and then you make what's called a karyotype, and you start with the longest chromosome chain to the shortest. And here we see an XY cell. That means this cell came from a male, because this tiny Y is in males. If it was a female, it would be two X's there, would be a normal female chromosome. So these are the blueprints for the nucleic acids that are hooked together to make a code to carry out primarily the cellular synthesis instructions of how to take amino acids, fatty acids, carbohydrates, minerals, vitamins, hook them all together to make bioactive molecules that carry out the process of life. But what they're using is those molecules that were in the compositional matter chart that we started out with. Now, this is a cartoon from Annual Reviews of Biochemistry, 1985, by a husband and wife team from Washington University at St. Louis, a high-tiered medical school. And in this article, there are over 300 citations of the years of papers that were published to develop the details of this assembly line. And right here at the left, we have an ideal cell that are different shapes and different organs of the body, but all of them have a nucleus where the DNA or the chromosomes are present. And this is much like the reference library of life. The DNA does not go out into the cell. It's kept inside the nucleus. And to have a working program, you've heard of RNA. Well, nucleic acid molecules are complementary made from this chain, and they go out of the nucleus, out to the assembly line, where in this approximately 1,000 magnification of the cell, you don't see anything out here, but with an electron microscopy and special stains up to 100,000 magnifications, you see there's 1, 2, 3 major factory steps that are called the ribosome, endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi. Now, the research that I was asked to get involved in 1985 was why have leaf gel from the aloe plant been used for over 5,000 years to support improved health in human beings? And with the chart of the approximately 50 specialists in 12 different institutions, combined with the work with the cornfields, we found out that in this center portion here is the biochemistry of the active ingredient, or acetylated mannose sugar that is made in the aloe leaf. And what we have here is 9 molecules in the endoplasmic reticulum, are in 3 chains that make up a domain on the surface of all the cells of the body. All the cells have this domain made up from this active ingredient from the aloe plant. And this domain is for cell-to-cell instructions and harmony between all the cells. It's very important that the trillions of cells in our body work together to carry out the processes of life. And this was discovered, but what we have here is more important to me than just the fact that we found out that this is why the aloe leaf gel has been used, because on this assembly line, every nutrient is at some point, let's go back, at some point is important on this assembly line. And it's not just the acetylated mannose, but all the different nutrient molecules, amino acids, fatty acids, other carbohydrates, which are about 200 in nature, and the vitamins and the minerals are put together to make all the structure and function molecules in the body. And we have anatomic structural structures like our skin, our bones, our liver, but we in addition have white cells that migrate around that are made on this assembly line in the bone marrow. This is present in every cell in our body, and this biochemistry in the center was why the aloe acetylated mannose, also called Acemannan, was so important. But it also demonstrates how all the different units or molecules of nutrition are put together on this assembly line to make all the structure and function molecules of the body. And this is a universal truth of how our cells work. And I want to go to the next thing. That we talked about the DNA and the chromosomes, and I showed you the fluorescent karyotype in a white cell. But you can think of it much like a biological computer. This blue strip here is phosphate molecules. There's 3 different systems they've tried to visually point out what's going on in the chromosomes of the cell, and there are 46 of them, or 23 pairs. And attached to this, shall we say, the phosphate structure of the computer are the programs written in the 4 nucleic acids that are hooked to each of these bands of phosphate. And one band will be the heredity of the mother, and the other band, the heredity of the father, that comes together when the egg and the sperm comes together. Well, that's where each side of these come. In other words, one will come from the egg, one will come from the sperm. And this shows the actual type of molecules. These are phosphates. And these inside here are the nucleic acids. See here, this says phosphate ester with the blue. And here is another depiction using plates for the nucleic acids that have the programs written in there. And this is how the molecules look like of the phosphate. But this is essentially a biocomputer that controls the assembly line in each cell of our body, and that you have to supply in your diet the nutrient molecules that these programs in this DNA say has to be provided to hook together properly to carry out the processes of life. Now, does this really work? Well, at the University of Texas in Houston, they took white cells, which I showed you an example of the chromosomes, and they put them into culture, and they put regular medium, which would be the first one, colors of each of these graphs telling you how much is made. And then we put 1 microgram of the acetylated mannose from the aloe plant, 10, 100, and 1,000. And the more you parts you provide, the more of interleukin-1, interleukin-2, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor, granulocyte macrophage colony factor, interferon alpha, and interferon gamma. It's a good thing that interferon alpha is not increased, because that's a molecule that erodes cartilage and arthritis, and the interferon gamma is particularly active in anti-cancer activity and to activate viruses. But these are the various steps in the cascade of awakening the host defenses or the inflammatory reaction. And these work together to produce balance in our metabolism of our cells. Before we leave this, we ignored where this little diamond is about the colony macrophage factor, because all we were focused on was the biochemistry in the endoplasmic reticulum to make that domain made up of 9 molecules of mannose phosphate and the domain for cell-to-cell communication. But this is the molecule that activates in the bone marrow adult stem cells, and that's an incredible molecule or activity to restore health, to regenerate aged, damaged, and degenerated cells in the body. And you can see on the more you provide of the allo molecule, the more of this molecule is made, which is extremely important. I don't think we'll go into too much detail of this today, but that is very important. I use this as an example to tell you how incredible the process of life is, that the seeds, beans, and legumes are a package that provides for the next generation of that plant. And it is an example of the creative power and design that is present in life on Earth. Now, this can be either a legume, a bean, or a seed, but it has a coating over the outside of it, which is a biopolymer, a complex change that protects what's inside the little package that is a provision for the next generation. It protects it from being too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, and has some molecules in it that it discourages animals from eating it, or fungus or bacteria from consuming it, because the cotyledon in here is a storage of nutrients for the little sleeping embryo of the new plant. And it sits there, and with the proper water and warmth and all, this seed comes in to utilize the nutrients that are in this package and being protected by the coat to make the first root and first leaf is supported by this nutrient molecules in here in the cotyledon. Then photosynthesis is turned on, and these infant little leaves begin to process carbon dioxide to make the carbon chains that we pointed out before for amino acids, for fatty acids, and carbohydrates, or the sugar chains, and start the process of life. So with each seed, there is provision of nutrition for the first root and the first leaf, and then photosynthesis is turned on. That's a marvelous little package of to explain how incredible the provisions for life are on our planet. Now, I want to point out that one of the molecules that are made on the assembly line is an important one called glutathione. Now, cells, just like as human beings, we have a daily cycle. We're alive and active part of the day. We eat at certain times. We go to the bathroom at certain times. and finally we go to sleep, and we renew, and we wake up again. So it's a cycle for our body. Well, individual cells have a cycle, and in the early stage of it, which I call good housekeeping cycle under control of the genes, everything in the cell is put into balance. And the three amino acids make up glutathione, which are made of glycine, glutamate, cysteine that I showed you before, which had the sulfhydryl group on it, makes glutathione, and this molecule covers 60% of the free radical scavenging and antioxidant activity inside the metabolism of the cell. And the SH group of cysteine binds to toxins made by our cells, as well as foreign toxins. And all of this balances the biochemistry in the cell in this good housekeeping stage. And the father of human physiology, Dr. Hans Selye, said this period of balancing inside the cell is homeostasis. And I use this as an example of one cell from one gene instruction of how to hook together, and we'll use this a little further explanation to kind of show you how the body works. See, glutamate, there's plenty of it in our diet and plenty of glycine, but cysteine is primarily in cruciferous vegetables. We're talking about broccoli, cauliflower, kale, radishes, turnips that have kind of a bite to them. It's because that sulfur in it gives it that bite, and it's a molecule that you can't hardly get children to eat. But with energy from the mitochondria that we were talking about, there's a transfer of energy from the sun to the bond between carbons to make the ATP. It brings in energy, and out of this cysteine, glutamate, and glycine, you make, with an enzyme, glutathione synthetase, this molecule of glutathione. And it's got an SH group attached here, which is extremely important to bind to toxins. And this is the typical molecule that's made in the cell. Here's the SH group and the positive here, and how this is made. And there'll be two molecules of this, and say that from the mitochondria, there are free radicals made when the actual carbon dioxide reversal of photosynthesis made, and this HSH attacks to nascent oxygen that might be released, or any negative ion, to make it balanced inside the cell. That's how that works. And this is just an example of what goes on that assembly line with the various nutrient molecules. And this shows that the free radical is bound to the SH group. And now I want to go to something that I hope I can make work, is that you don't have any life without water. And in the composition of matter thing, I've shown each little block has a certain amount of energy in it, and that we showed that two very simple hydrogen molecules are combined with an oxygen molecule, which is a 18 plus 2 electrons amount of energy. And what we're going to show you is what I call and think is probably the spark of life. There's the reason you don't have plant or animal life without the activity of the water. And at one point in here, they will show you what I saw under the microscope in 1954 in the fall in the biology laboratory, where carbon particles were under the microscope with water, and you'll see how you can't see the H2O molecule, but they hit each particle. This is called Brownian movement, because originally in 1820s, the biologist Brown saw these pollen molecules that he was seeing dancing because of the effect of the water. He thought that the pollen granules were probably lifelike, and that's what you were seeing. But Einstein, after 1900, re-examined this and says what's happening is the H2O2 molecule shows the amount of energy in those three molecules and how it has an impact. And this is going on inside the cells, and why so much of our body is water. Nothing works. And one of the terrible things is the problem of dehydration. Now,
a question I get asked by my students is, how do we know that atoms are real? Well, rather than just sit there and tell them stuff, I'd rather them see with their own eyes. And I want to show you that same evidence that a Swedish botanist named Robert Brown first saw in 1829, and that was used by Albert Einstein in 1905 to confirm the existence of atoms. All you need for this is a microscope, preferably one that goes to 400x. This one goes to 1000 power, however, and if you're going to use that powerful of a microscope, you're going to need some immersion oil. But all you really need for this, if you have a basic microscope, is a glass slide and a cover slip, and you need some milk, preferably one that has at least 1% fat in it. I diluted this with a 1-to-1 ratio of water to milk, and you just need a little paper towel to wick up any excess on the side. All you got to do is take a little drop of milk, put it right in the center of the slide, just like that. You don't need much at all. Take the cover slip, drop it right into place. And I have a very thin amount, but if you have excess, you do want to use the paper towel to kind of wick up any excess on the side. Take the slide and put it on your microscope. Use my other hand for this. Stick the slide into place. And then you're going to want to use your high power objective. So I'm at low, medium, high, and I should say I want to use the extra high power oil immersion. This is 100, and then with the 10 power, this is 1000 power. Lock it into place. I'm going to use a little bit of that immersion oil. A little drop right here. And then all I have to do is I lower down the objective until it makes contact with the immersion oil, just like that. And now we're going to go look through the eyepiece. Okay, I've got it focused. Let's go have a look. This is what Robert Brown saw in 1829. You'll see the little droplets of milk fat are bouncing around. He wasn't sure exactly what this was, and although he was using pollen grain, he actually saw virtually the same thing. If I zoom in, you'll notice the little drops of milk fat are very animated. Now, back then, they didn't know what this was. Some people thought that maybe these are living organisms, kind of like what you would see in a pond sample. Some people thought that maybe it was a mirage, kind of like on a road on a hot day, causing maybe a little rippled appearance. But Albert Einstein, at the age of 26, in 1905, he was single-handedly able to demonstrate that this was actually atomic theory, visible with the eye. Albert Einstein said that atoms are vibrating, and the atoms are kind of bumping into these little bubbles. This is what I saw in 1954. And you can see the bubbles kind of knocking around like this.
One little particle.
It's kind of like if you were to go to a concert and there was a mosh pit, you would be knocked around as well, with everybody banging their heads and jumping around. This here, of course, is not proof of atoms, but no one has come up with a better explanation for this Brownian motion than atomic theory. This here, ladies and gentlemen, is evidence itself for the existence of atoms. This here, ladies.
Well, we can't seem to proceed from this slide to the next one for some reason. Okay. Now, what you just got through seeing was an example that I found to show you that each little square in the composition of matter chart has energy, and this is the energy of two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen molecule, which is so essential for life in plants and animals. And I advance to you that this is the basis for the spark of life. It runs the little assembly line that I've shown you in each cell and carries the information of the nucleic acids in the chromosomes to the organelles inside the cell, the assembly line, to carry out the life processes. But does all of this make any difference? Well, I would think you'd say it does to Cole. Now, Cole's mother in tears told me how she and her husband bought a new home and they didn't know that smoke detectors were not connected, and they had a fire, and that her 5-year-old died in her arms from smoke inhalation. And Cole was about 18 months old, and he was unconscious at her feet, and they carried him to the hospital, and he lay in coma for 3 years. And here he is in coma. And this is only proof that Kyle awakened by taking more comprehensive nutrition for 6 months, and that I make house calls in Oregon if people or parents call me, because I went to see Kyle, and though he is not totally normal by any means, he's not in coma, and I could tell there was mental activity because he has a very attractive mother. And every time she would come in the room and he would see her, he'd go, woo, woo. The expression, I think, that he knew his mother was pretty. This is the electrical activity of his brain, the 3 years that he was in coma from the toxic effect of the smoke inhalation and the fire in the home. Notice that these are different electrodes around the brain, and he was on dietary supplements for 6 months, and this is what happened. And this is why his pediatric physician, who was also a biochemist PhD, sent word he wanted me to come to Oregon and explain to him how this was possible, because this mother told another mother who had a little girl that was in the front seat of her car, and they had a collision. She hit her head on the dash, and she had been in coma for at least 2 years. And so this mother shared with that mother. And what I really wanted to point out in the early part, when I said, why am I talking to you? And I'm no great expert. I would say that I'm a very good listener. And I have attempted ever since '85 to share with people what I've heard from parents that have experienced the benefits of more comprehensive nutrition and what it can do for the biochemistry of life. This is the increased brain activity of Kyle at his annual evaluation, and why his doctor wanted me to come up there and explain this. And I basically told him that all cells work better with more comprehensive nutrition to supply what nutrient molecules that the genes call for to make bioactive molecules. So obviously, the brain was working better on improved nutrition. Now, in British Columbia, I received a telephone call wanting me to come up there and present on this research that had been done on the active ingredient from the aloe plant. And finally, first I was overwhelmed, but finally somebody I thought important wanted to hear what I had to say. But I asked finally, as we were making travel plans and all, why do you want me to come? And they said, we have 7 children that were born to alcoholic mothers on the Indian reservation. And the government took them away from their alcoholic mothers and placed them in a foster home. And they had been in special education for several years. And they were behavioral problems at home and in school. and they were making no progress in special education. All of a sudden, they began to, first, their behavior improved at home and in school, and then they began to make progress in their classes. They had done an initial government-sponsored IQ testing, and 7 children averaged less than 50 IQ, which is a terrible expression of fetal alcohol syndrome damage from the alcohol breakdown products. The mother that was an alcoholic. After they started improving behavior and progressing in school, they repeated their IQs, and they ranged from 80 to over 100. They wanted me to come and explain how this was possible. This caused an intellectual challenge because for at least about 10 years, we've been talking about the 9 molecules hooked together to make the domain on the surface of all the cells for cell-to-cell communication. I immediately thought that this does not explain how these children went from IQs of less than 50 to range from 80 to over 100. And I have a syllabus that I have written about discovering that these children were generating adult stem cells that migrated into their brain, stem cells from their own bone marrow, stimulated by the presence of the acetylated mannose from the aloe plant. And that's why Kyle awakened from his coma, and that's why these children's fetal alcohol syndrome improved. I will give you a little information on it. Fetal alcohol syndrome has about 36 traits of fetal alcohol syndrome children, and you have a form about how many of these traits do you have, and these 7 children average 27.7 out of the 36. As you can see there, 2 of them, one's 34, one 33. That is very serious fetal alcohol syndrome damage. Then we asked the foster parents. They've got these traits present. Well, how severe is this expression on a scale of 0 to 10? 10 being very prominent and 0 being absent. Well, you can see they averaged 8. So they not only had a lot of the FAS traits, but it was very serious. After being on more comprehensive nutrition for a year, they averaged 2.5. And this severity is a 67% improved. And that's why they wanted me to come up and try to explain how this could be. One of the things I want to share with you that I learned when I was up there is I thought to have fetal alcohol syndrome damage, you had to be a fall down drunk mother. We had testimonies made of mothers that at very critical time in their pregnancy had only one stiff highball drink, and it induced fetal alcohol syndrome. So it depends on what stage of development the embryo is at. If the brain is being developed and you drink alcohol, you don't have to be an alcoholic. You just have to have some of the breakdown products of alcohol that are toxic to the farming brain, which was news to me for sure. Now, Emily had a mitochondrial gene defect and an incredible history. She was found about 2 o'clock at night in Ukraine in an all-night restaurant, wrapped up real closely and left there by her birth mother, who obviously found out there was something wrong with her and they could not handle it. And so she became a ward of the state, and a couple in Orlando, Florida, she was a flight attendant and he was a pilot, could not have children, and so they adopted her. And they soon found out that she was not doing well, and she began to regress. and they described how she became unconscious and was maintained by a feeding tube. And somehow somebody told them about the benefits of the more comprehensive nutrition built around the active ingredient of the aloe plant, Acemannan. And it was set up that I was supposed to meet the mother and the little girl, Emily, and her father in the hotel lobby. Well, they were 30 minutes late. And that's okay, because we found out she was at dance lessons and that the teacher had gotten there 30 minutes late and held them over. But she was also taking gymnastics and exceeding in that. So more comprehensive nutrition, supporting what the genes call for in cellular synthesis to make bioactive molecules, were very important to Kyle, who had been in coma, and to Emily, that had a mitochondrial gene defect. This is a very interesting case of Adina. When she was in her mother's uterus, they were taking a ultrasound, and they noted that the distance from her elbow to her wrist and from her knee to her hip and her knee to her ankle were very short, and they diagnosed achondroplastic dwarfism before she was born. Well, the mother started on the more comprehensive nutrition while pregnant, and then when she was nursing the new baby, she also took it. And when they started the diet, they added it to her diet. And here she is, 5.5 years old, and they were shocked that X-rays of the growth centers of her bones were open and normal, which in achondroplastic dwarfism, this doesn't happen. And here to the far right is a picture when she was 6 years old. And we have followed her in photographs that she has developed into a normal height. And this is the growth patterns of Adina. If you can see, she started out very low. This is the normal range for little girls, and she's below. But as she continued to have this more comprehensive nutrition, this is the highest for this age group, the shortest. She's nearly in the mid zone, and she has grown up and is a beautiful child that shows none of the stigmata of, say, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It made a difference to Adina. This is a child that's probably helped more children in our country than any other. When she was 9 years old, her mother, Barbara, phoned me and was telling how she was in special education, but had made no progress, could not say her ABCs, couldn't add or subtract. And she pointed out that she missed a lot of special education because she constantly had asthma attacks. And when she didn't have asthma attacks, she had infections of her ears or sinuses or bronchus or early bronchial pneumonia, missed a lot of school. However, she started her on the active ingredient from the aloe plus other nutrient molecules that are low or absent in the modern food chain. And here she is at 13. And I'll have to tell you, I accused the mother of going to the mall and going, say, to Glamour Shots and having this special photograph made. But no, she said both of these pictures were made by a mobile itinerant photograph that came to the special education and took pictures. But this has been on the cover of throwaway medical journals. And I would say that if this impact on Down syndrome, trisomy 21, has been so marked that parents have had children with problems and said, man, if it can do this for Michelle, it can do anything. And that's why Michelle has helped so many other children. She's now in her early 30s. She finished high school and special education certificate. She went to a sign language school, and she now works, of all things, handling payroll and taxes and all for a automobile parts company. And she's gotten recognition awards for being such an affable employee with the public at 30 some odd years of age. Now, I do not want to mislead you by saying that all the benefits that Michelle got was from more comprehensive nutrition. I have never known of a mother that has put more time and effort in trying to help her child maximize what she was given at birth, combined with these nutrients, that it's a combination of parenting, an incredible mother with nutrition, and of course, an incredible response. Now, I have tried to share with you on my computers. I have 26 published articles on the file of how more comprehensive nutrition improves brain chemistry to support normal brain function. The reason there's so many published papers is that this is contrary to educational theory of the establishment of our public schools that basically say there will be no improvement in academic performance or anything in schools until we get more tax money for these various reasons they tell you, and to get better results than they were even projecting with more comprehensive nutrition calls them to do studies to prove that this wouldn't do it. And this is not only papers that were published in the United States, but in Australia, all trying to prove that this wouldn't work, but they honest ones published and showed the benefits. Actually, there were several studies that were the most dramatic, that they were extremely excited in the early phases of how their special education students were improving. But they eventually realized this is such a contrast that when we asked them for data to be able to publish a paper, they wouldn't give us the data. And ultimately, they even denied that they'd ever done the studies because this conflicted with the agenda of the public schools so completely. The highest level of evidence-based science that we've been able to do is that second article there, the effects of allopolymannose, which is the aloe active ingredient Acemannan. Allopolymannose multi-nutrient complex on cognitive and immune functioning in Alzheimer's patients. This was done, published in January 2013. And in fact, early, mid, and advanced Alzheimer's patients awakened and improved memory and cognition. 69% got a benefit in this little pilot study. And I might add that this was required by the Institutional Investigational Review Board to do a bunch of studies to prove that this was not toxic to these elderly patients. And this successful study that showed no toxicity, we got the bonuses of 69% improvement in cognition and memory, 46% improved cognition and memory, and 23% stabilized and did not get worse. This was a study that was required to allow us to do a major study with control patients that would cost over $1 million, but we have not been able to find a source to pay for the final study. But this is a very interesting medical school in Miami. The dean was the platform speaker at the dedication of a new building dedicated to complementary and alternative medicine practices. And he stated that the Miami Miller School of Medicine wanted to be the premier institution in the United States to evaluate Oriental medicine, outer Vedic medicine from India, Kunandari practices of Central and South America, and folk medicine from Africa to find out what works, what it works, and to integrate it into modern medical care. Well, this is where we took our grant to do this study, and it was very successful. As I say, we got bonuses, and we drew blood as the patients entered the study and when they exited the study. And not only did the stem cells, CD14 monocytes, increase nearly 400%, but the serums, even though they were diluted with the entire blood volume, showed an increase in brain-derived neural growth factor, which showed not only these cells increased, but were transforming into neurons. And the theory that the benefit was that these stem cells migrated into the aged and degenerated and damaged neurons and transformed into new vital brain functioning cells, which explains why so many good things happen, like the fetal alcohol syndrome damaged children, like Kyle that was in coma, like Emily that had a mitochondrial defect, and like Michelle. These adult stem cells are incredibly powerful. And also a scientific poster was presented in California on this study, which in January 1986, by accident, and I put that in quotation marks, I had a patient that I was showing the benefits or exploring the potential benefits that had advanced prostate cancer, and I didn't know that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Well, not only did the bone metastasis for prostate cancer go away, but he returned with memory and cognition, which his wife told me about, that had gone over my head. And I never forgot this. And in 1986, January, to the article published in January 2013, I never forgot this and wanted to find the resources to do the research to prove it. I have told you about all the papers for normal brain function being supported by improved nutrition. And probably the biggest group is the paper by the psychiatrist, Dr. Katie Dykman, and her PhD husband, Dykman, at the University of Arkansas School of Medicine, the effects of nutritional supplements on attention deficit hyperactivity, ADD, ADHD, which is so common in the United States. And this was a paper on 17 students that improved the less hyperactivity, their inattention went down, attention improved, and then oppositional defiant and compulsive disorders improved. And there were significant improvements in these children with this very common brain function problem. Now in Texas, for over 40 years at the University of Texas, there was a PhD biochemist by the name of Roger J. Williams that wrote 12 books on nutrition. He did research on nutrition all those 40 some odd years. And the most important book I call Nutritional Against Disease, published in 1971. And in this, in the first chapter, he says that all my books and all my years of research lead me to one sentence that it summarizes everything I've done over these years. And I quote it from that book: "The human body heals itself, and nutrition provides resources to accomplish the task." And he lived to was about 94 years old. And I never did know him, but I feel like I'm just a, shall we say, a disciple that follows in his deep footsteps to recognize that I started out in the middle of the road on science and medicine based on primarily organic molecules that we call pharmaceuticals, and found out how powerful nutritional supply of nutrient molecules to cellular synthesis under the control of genes can function for personal, preventive, and interventional health management. And this is something that I feel very strongly that every individual and their family needs to know in this time of inflation and chaos in the world and exploitive costs for health care management. This is a safe, effective, and economical way to manage personal health. Thank you for your attention.